This morning, this all-Democratic government produced yet another absolutely terrible inflation report. Inflation during the month of June shattered the experts' predictions. We are now, listen to this, at 9.1% annual inflation. Yet another fresh 40-year high, the most out-of-control inflation that American families have seen since the early 1980s. Food costs are up more than 10%. Energy costs are up more than 40%. The cost of the fuel that drives us to work, delivers our goods, drives our economy, are all up over 60%. These are staggeringly bad numbers, and they were fueled directly by the reckless spending spree that Democrats rammed through on party line just last year. Remember, right before the $2 trillion spending spree, President Biden said, quote, "The biggest risk is not going too big. It's if we go too small." The Senate Democratic leader said, quote, "I do not think the dangers of inflation, at least in the near term, are very real." These were gigantic unforced errors. One leading economist recently said the so-called American Rescue Plan was, quote, "arguably the biggest fiscal policy mistake in several decades," end quote. Our core inflation rate here in America is more than 2 percentage points higher than in Europe. Inflation is uniquely bad here because our all-Democratic government has made uniquely bad choices. And now American families are dealing with the fallout every single day. It's no secret how much the American people disapprove of the course Washington Democrats have put us on. They say so in poll after poll after poll. So you might think by now that our colleagues would be ready to try a different approach. Well, guess again, President Biden and his party, fresh off the spending America into inflation, now want to tax hike us into recession. They're behind closed doors playing around with what may amount to the single largest tax increase in American history. Tucked inside are exactly the sort of radical ideas that working families can least afford right now. They want a giant tax hike on pass-through small businesses, a category, listen to this, that encompasses 95% of all businesses in the country, 95% of them. Take it from a constituent of mine in Mount Sterling, Kentucky, who put it this way: small businesses are already in a struggle to survive with all the taxes and regulations we have to deal with. Adding another tax is only making things worse. Democrats also want a so-called methane fee that amounts to a big new tax on domestic natural gas. While their inflation has pushed American families' natural gas prices and electricity costs up through the roof already. If following reckless spending and runaway inflation with a gigantic, painful tax hike sounds like a bad idea to you, believe me, you're not alone. Even some House Democrats are lighting their hair on fire over what a terrible idea these discussions are. One House Democrat from New Jersey is telling reporters that she is, quote, "not for any type of legislation that raises taxes, especially right now as my constituents are facing inflation, cost of living increases, and housing prices." Well, Madam President, let me put it this way. When House Democrats from the Northeast start trying to sound more like Ronald Reagan running against Jimmy Carter, you know they've gotten themselves into a fix. Too bad every single House Democrat except one and every single Senate Democrat voted for the $2 trillion mistake that brought us to where we are. The Democrats complaining about inflation today voted in lockstep for the bill that brought us here. And now their answer to picking families' pockets once is to now pick the families' pockets yet a second time. The same Democrats who spent us into inflation now want to tax us into recession.